welcome. Tonight we will step quietly into one of the colder, quieter, and more difficult landscapes of the 20th century. The Soviet Gulag system was a vast network of labor camps scattered across the endless reaches of Russia and Siberia. They were not places of comfort or hope, but of survival. Millions passed through them, their days marked by hunger, routine, and the steady rhythm of hard labor. In this journey, we will explore what daily life felt like for ordinary prisoners. Then we will turn to the story of a man who endured the camps and gave them a voice. After that, we'll pause to reflect on the hidden traces left behind in the earth. And finally, we will look at life in the other Russia, the Russia of the elite, living in striking contrast to those in the Gulag. Settle in, breathe deeply. Let the noise of your day drift away, and allow this gentle exploration of the past to carry you into rest. Imagine waking in a wooden barrack, its walls thin, its corners traced with frost. The night has been restless, broken by coughing, by the shifting of men packed into narrow bunks. Outside, the world is frozen. The day begins before dawn. Prisoners shuffle into line for the morning count, breath hanging in the air like mist. The food is sparse. A slice of coarse bread, a thin soup that does little more than warm the stomach. Hunger becomes part of life, a steady, dull ache. Work defines the hours, logging in the forest, hauling heavy loads, building roads across frozen ground. Tools are blunt, clothing is inadequate, and the cold is constant. Guards watch from a distance, their presence as unyielding as the snow. There are no walls of stone or iron. The wilderness itself is the barrier. To step beyond the camp without supplies would mean vanishing into an ocean of forest and ice. And yet, within this bleakness, small gestures of humanity appear. A whispered story in the barrack, a song sung quietly during labor, a piece of bread shared with a weaker comrade. These moments kept a spark alive, even as the days blurred together in fatigue and repetition. Life in the Gulag was not about progress or achievement, but about endurance. Each morning brought the same cold, the same hunger, the same question, how to make it through the day. As you lie comfortably now, you may imagine the contrast. Thin blanket against a Siberian night, a crust of bread to quiet hunger, labor that never ends. This was the reality for those who lived behind the invisible walls of the Gulag. Let us now move gently from this imagined daily rhythm into the life of one man who endured it and who carried its memory into the wider world. To understand the Gulag not just as a system, but as an experience, we can look through the eyes of one man who lived it and later gave it words. Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. Born in 1918, he came of age in the Soviet Union during a time of immense upheaval. As a young man, he studied mathematics and literature, and when the Second World War broke out, he served as an officer in the Red Army. Like many, he believed deeply in his country's struggle against the invading German forces. But in 1945, near the end of the war, Solzhenitsyn was arrested. His crime was not violence or betrayal, but words. A few critical lines in a private letter about Stalin. In the Soviet system, even such small expressions could be seen as dangerous. For this, he was sentenced to 8 years in the labor camps. His years inside followed the same rhythm we described before. The morning counts, the cold, the hunger, the endless work. At first, he was placed in camps that demanded heavy labor, but later he was transferred to what was called a sharashka, special camp where scientists and engineers were kept to work on research projects. Even there, the restrictions, the separation from family, the loss of freedom weighed heavily. When his sentence ended, he was not released to ordinary life, but exiled to a remote village in Kazakhstan. It was there, living in quiet obscurity, that he battled illness and began to shape his experiences into words. He wrote secretly, hiding manuscripts, trusting friends to guard them. In 1962, his novella One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich was published, described with stark simplicity a single day in the Gulag. There were no heroes, no melodrama, just the routine of survival, from roll call to evening count. For Soviet readers, it was shocking to see such a story in print. For many, it was the first glimpse of a reality they had only heard whispered. Later, Solzhenitsyn continued to write, gathering testimonies, leaving them into his monumental work, The Gulag Archipelago. It was more than a book. It was a monument of memory. documenting the vast scale of the camps, the bureaucracy that maintained them, and the human cost. It was published abroad in 1973, and its impact was immense. For this, Solzhenitsyn faced renewed persecution. He was expelled from the Soviet Union, stripped of citizenship, and forced to live abroad, yet his words endured. They gave voice to millions who had no chance to tell their own stories. His life reminds us that even within systems built to silence, words can survive. The quiet endurance of one prisoner became, in time, the memory of a whole generation. As we leave Solzhenitsyn's story, let us drift from biography to archaeology, from the life of one man to the hidden traces of many. The gulags were designed to be temporary, functional, and largely invisible. Built from wood, scattered across remote forests and tundra, many of their structures have long since decayed. Yet the earth remembers what walls and roofs could not. Archaeologists and historians, traveling to abandoned campsites, often find the quiet remains of daily life. Rusted tools left behind, fragments of tin bowls, the outlines of barracks now softened into the soil. In some places, watchtowers still stand, their wooden frames tilting, weathered by decades of snow and wind. There is a kind of silence in these places. Unlike the ruins of cities or castles which attract crowds, the remnants of gulags sit far from most human paths. To walk among them is to feel the isolation that once defined them. Even the air seems heavier, as if holding on to the memory of those who once labored there. One striking discovery is how personal artifacts survive. Simple carved objects, fashioned from scraps of wood. Small containers made from tin. Letters, sometimes hidden in the walls, never delivered, but preserved by chance. These details remind us that behind the scale of millions, there were individuals, each leaving traces of themselves in quiet ways. Some mass graves have also been uncovered, their presence confirming what survivors had long testified. Yet even here, researchers tread carefully, balancing the need to remember with the desire to leave resting places undisturbed. The mystery of the Gulag system is not that it existed, for that is well documented, but how such a vast network could operate for so long in such secrecy. The Soviets living in cities knew of the camps only as rumors. The remoteness was intentional. Distance and wilderness created a shroud as strong as any wall. Today, in some places, small memorials stand among the ruins. Crosses, plaques, stones inscribed with names. They mark what was once hidden, acknowledging what human memory must not lose. And yet, much remains unstudied, fading back into the forests and the permafrost. The archaeology of the Gulag is quiet, and it is fragile. It does not offer grand treasures or dramatic discoveries, but faint echoes, a nail, a boot sole, the foundations of a barrack. These pieces, small and unremarkable on their own, together speak of a life lived in repetition, in survival, in endurance. And now, as we move gently away from these ruins, we turn our gaze to a very different scene. Not the hunger and cold of the prisoner, but the warmth and privilege of the Soviet elite, who lived in sharp contrast to the world of the camps. While millions endured the harsh life of the camps, another world existed far away, yet bound to it. The world of the Soviet elite. In Moscow, Leningrad, and other centers of power, officials lived in spacious apartments or secluded dakas, countryside houses surrounded by trees, with gardens, porches, and warmth in winter. These homes were supplied with goods that ordinary citizens, let alone prisoners, could not imagine. Shelves stocked with fine bread, cured meats, imported fruits, and bottles of wine. Daily life for a member of the political class followed a different rhythm. Mornings might begin with a breakfast of eggs, tea, and fresh butter. Work was conducted in offices, not forests. Meetings held in tall buildings where the sound of typewriters replaced the clang of axes. Evenings were filled with gatherings, concerts, or private dinners, where conversation flowed and tables were heavy with dishes. The contrast was not only material, but psychological. For the powerful, the Gulag was often an abstract concept, a mechanism of the state, not a lived reality. Some knew of its scale. Others chose not to ask. The wilderness that kept prisoners in also kept knowledge out, and yet the worlds were connected. The timber that built the elite cities, the gold mine in Siberia, the roads stretching across the tundra, all were shaped by labor from the camps. The comfort of the few was tied, silently, to the suffering of the many. Even within the elite, there was unease. Power in the Soviet Union was never fully secure. A single misstep, a single rumor, could transform privilege into punishment. More than one official, once seated at a banquet table, later found himself behind barbed wire. This duality, dakas and dining rooms on one side, barracks and bread rations on the other, defined much of Soviet society. It was a world of stark opposites, coexisting in the same country, often within the same decade. As we reflect on this contrast, we see not only the Gulag, but the broader pattern of history. Privilege and hardship, comfort and endurance, existing side by side. And now, we will take one last step into a gentle closing, a space where the past settles and the present feels secure. We have walked quietly tonight through the shadows of the Soviet Gulag. We imagined the daily rhythm of prisoners, the thin bread, the biting cold, the endless labor. We followed the life of Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn, whose words carried the memory of those years into the world. We paused at the remnants left behind, the rusted tools, the faint outlines of barracks, the silence of forgotten places. And we contrasted all of this with the comfort of the Soviet elite, whose lives of warmth and plenty stood in such stark opposition. The Gulag system is no longer present. Its barracks have collapsed, its watchtowers lean, its roads are slowly reclaimed by forest and snow. Ash! What remains are memories, stories, and lessons. That endurance is possible, even in the harshest of environments, and that history often holds both suffering and resilience side by side. As you lie here now, safe and warm, notice the difference. Your blanket is thick, your room is quiet, and your freedom is unshaken. The gulags belong to the past, and the comfort of the present is a gift easily overlooked. Let these reflections settle gently in your mind. If you are awake, allow them to drift softly into the background. If you are already resting, let them fade into dreams. Thank you for joining this quiet journey. Sleep well, and may peace be with you.